What does it mean to be a warrior for the Christian faith? Well, friends, we have a treat today. My friend John Lavelle from the Warrior Poet Society is here to give us a behind the scenes look at his life, his ministry, the Warrior Poet Society, answer some tough questions about how you could be in the military, but also be a Christian. John, one of my highlights, you and I went to Israel about 2 or 3 years ago, and you and me and my wife ran and did a workout on the Sea of Galilee. Absolutely loved it. Great memories. Thanks for coming on the show and joining me.
Israel was a blast, and that was a highlight as well. Though I was trying to put a tougher face on. I don't do a ton of cardio these days, and so I thought I was going to blow chunks right there in the Sea of Galilee, and I thought that'd be sacrilegious, so I held it back. But that was a great time, man.
Super, super fun. Well, we're gonna unpack your story, some of your insights. You are rocking it on your YouTube channel. So proud of you, man. Every time I think I'm like, hey, I'm really rocking it, I'm reminded my buddy John is killing it. And so we're gonna get to your YouTube channel, but I want to hear about your story to faith. How did you become a Christian?
Sure. So, growing up, I was brought up a bit around church. Like, I think it's kind of that. Let's see, baby boomer, bring your kids to church because it's the right thing to do. So, we were Methodist one year and Episcopalian and kind of not going, and then Baptist, and then just kind of like we were all of it because we were none of it. But I got saved pretty dramatically when I was 19 years old
Hmm.
upon entering the military.
Okay, now you're gonna have to unpack this for me. What happened when you were 19? Why were you? What was it at that moment where you had a dramatic faith conversion?
So it was a pretty awkward thing, especially for me. I'm more of an analytical guy. I'm a brass tacks. I'm a proof. I'm a logical kind of thinker. My Enneagram, I'm challenger, and I'm an analyst. And so it drives my wife and everyone else nuts because I'm going to research and I'm going to bring the heat. And so, yeah, anyway. Um, I was a bit of a strange conversion story in that I wasn't at church. I wasn't around a pastor. I was really alone right before basic training. I was entering
Hmm.
into the military, and something that was pretty inexplicable was happening. I was just all of a sudden, my heart was just like kind of crushed, and I wasn't
Hmm.
lonely. I'd moved out of my house when I was 15 years old. I'd been out on, out under my parents for a long time. I was a former wrestler and a pretty darn good one. So I was kind of a tough dude. And anyway, it was just beyond my comprehension why I would be so inexplicably broken. But
Hmm.
looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I know that God in heaven was crushing me for his good pleasure to change me into a different creation. And so, really, I felt like some people say of like, I accepted Jesus. I didn't have that experience. I was more accosted by Jesus. It was a
Hmm.
violent riot of the heart. It was an overthrow. And through that mess, I was converted to the Christian faith. And so that's what happened in my heart. And then my head needed to catch up to
Hmm.
some of exactly what had happened. And so apologetics would play a pretty crucial role in my young faith because I would be entering the military. I would go through a bunch of different rites of passage. I would make it into Ranger Battalion. That's the Army Special Operations. I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. And when I got to Ranger Battalion, I was selected out of a row of young Rangers, and a young sadistic sergeant came down and he was reading everyone's scores from all the training we'd gone through. I was top of the stack. I was a good young ranger. And so he selected me as kind of his cream of the crop to be part of his fire team in Ranger Battalion. He found out very quickly that I was a born again Christian and he
Wow.
had buyer's remorse. And so he wanted to get rid of me because he felt I would be a conscientious objector. He felt like I wouldn't pull the trigger and stack bodies when it came time to do killing things. And so he tried to get rid of me. And he did that by just trying to suffer to a point of quitting, and just made my life a living hell for at least a year or more. Just
Wow.
and so it would be common for me to just be doing PT, physical training exercises, push ups until you're literally collapsing in pools of your own sweat, while he casually
Jeez.
walked around me picking holes in my faith from it was full on apologetics. So I'm like having to read and understand and find answers to this because I didn't know anything. I knew no defense of the faith, nothing. I didn't know the answer to this question. And man, talk about apologetics trial by fire. Talk about having always being ready to give an account of the hope that was in you and being able to give a defense. And so apologetics was a incredibly important early piece of my conversion.
So
I
when
found
he,
this book.
oh,
It
you
was one of
did.
absolutely. So I was reading. I brought my Bible over to war with me. I went to war 5 different
Wow.
times with Ranger Battalion, 4 times to Afghanistan, one to Iraq. I always had my Bible with me. And on at least a couple of the tours, I brought Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And so that
Wow.
was the key book that I was reading and finding answers with. I'm sharing this with other soldiers as well. I'm leading Bible studies while overseas in between ventures, and like combat missions and kicking in doors and doing all that jazz. And so, yeah, it was critical stuff.
So that's incredible. You're going through intellectual challenges and physical challenges. Was there any point where you're like, maybe this heart experience was misguided and I can't answer this, or maybe I do want to quit like this guy's trying to make me do? Or did it make you dig in your heels and be like, I'm going to die before I quit? What was that process like in terms of your training and in terms of your faith?
So I know I wouldn't begrudge or shame anyone that did kind of have those doubts going through because I think that's a
Hmm.
pretty natural kind of thing to
Hmm.
work out that fear and salvation with fear and trembling. But I really didn't. I was all
Hmm.
in. I knew what I knew, and it was just a matter of finding the answers that really supported what was truth. But the more I dug in the different disciplines to really put together an intellectual support for the Christian worldview, the more I studied, the more satisfied I was,
Hmm.
and the more it strengthened my faith. And so, no, I didn't really have that, and it was interesting. And I think looking back, that God really just hooked me up miraculously because He knew the environment that I was in, Ranger Battalion, an incredibly difficult place just to get to, much less stay in, which is
Sure.
even hard. And then you're fighting, you're kicking in doors, hunting terrorists. And so to be able to survive in your faith, much less grow, and I was growing, I was white hot, I was pumped, I was excited about Jesus. I read my Bible cover to cover in the deserts of
Wow.
Afghanistan. And then I flipped it
Wow.
over and I did it again and again and again. It's where I learned Bible is on my own in the desert,
Wow.
reading Bible. And so, no, I was all in. I was all in.
So what happened with this guy who was treating you that way? Because I've been reading First Peter with some high school students, and Peter's like, suffer well to draw people to the kingdom, but when you suffer well, other people at times will mock you. How did he respond then and now? Have you seen him again? Have you talked to them? What's come of that, if anything?
I haven't.
Hmm.
I think it's Yeah, I ended up going to Ranger School and kind of get my tab because you get the scroll, which is the unit, and then the tab, which is kind of your rite of passage going to the Ranger School. And when I got back, I had proven myself enough and been
Hmm.
good enough at my job that before folks look at, the young Christian with suspicion, and I don't think that's going to work. But then I started gaining rank. I did very well at my job. And garnered everyone's respect. And then there was a shift where it kind of went for more of, no, God's not going to let anything happen to us when Lovell's with us because he likes Lovell a lot, And so when we're going through dangerous combat missions and everyone's like, oh, I think some of us are going to get, killed in this next mission. My Bible studies I was leading overseas in combat zones would swell, and then everything was going a little bit better. So I saw that, but it was a whole different ball game once I'd put in time, gained rank, showed competency at my job,
Hmm.
uh, courage in the face of fire. No, it actually switched when guys' lives would start falling apart, or when they,
Hmm.
you know, uh, had difficulties going on, I was there to answer some of those questions. I was living my faith out loud, and I was different, and everyone knew it.
I've never met anybody who said, "Hey, Sean, how do you reconcile being in the military and violence with the Old Testament?" But I've certainly thought about and met a lot of people who said, "How do you reconcile being in the military and, like you said, potentially killing people as a part of your job or defending life with the ethic of Jesus, in particular when Jesus said, 'Turn the other cheek'?" How do you reconcile and make sense of that?
Right. Is it hard for you to ask me a question that you already know the answer to really well?
Well, I have my thoughts, but Christians do differ on this.
I know, but
So,
right now, if like Professor McDowell has his binder open and he's like, let's see how well John does on this.
yes, I'm grading you. I'll send you a
Professor, bring
grade
it
when
on.
we're
Let's
done.
do it. Let's dance. Right. Well, I stabbed myself in the hand. And so if anybody sees this, this is called being an idiot. So I'm complete with that. Sure. So first off, you said Old Testament, no problem. New Testament's more difficult. I'd say God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yeah.
God is immutable. And so if it's true in the Old Testament in terms of character of God, it's true in the New Covenant and it's true tomorrow, forever. But I think people's rub is they just don't really understand Jesus completely. Rather, they've drawn a caricature of him. And so it leads
Hmm.
to a misunderstanding. So Jesus, we see in the book of Judges, I'm sorry, book of Joshua, where the commander of the Lord's army comes out and meets Joshua. I believe this is a Christophany appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament before the incarnation. You see also in Revelation 19, he's the commander of the Lord's army. He's leading the host. And so you recognize it's Commander Jesus. He saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven because he threw him headlong. He's been kicking butt since the creation of the world. Jesus is not to be trifled with. One of my favorite verses regarding kind of the fullness of Jesus comes out of early epistle in Revelation, where the Apostle John is taken up into the heavenly realm and a vision or body he didn't know. But anyway, he sees this angelic host and they're like, look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And he looks and he sees a lamb that looks like it has been slain. And I think that John, who was seeing this glimpse into heaven, really saw a lamb, but heaven really saw a dangerous, terrifying lion. And beware looking at Jesus and not seeing both. Because if we're not careful, we can make a caricature of him in that, no, he is the strong war captain. He is God himself, Emmanuel, God with us. Yes, he came to sacrifice and die on a cross. He took off sword to come to earth to die for us, to rescue us. That was what was required for the rescue operation. But when he got back to heaven, it's putting sword back on. And when he comes back, it's not to rescue, suffer, and die. It's to conquer and kill. It's Armageddon. And so you recognize he is both lion and lamb. Old Testament, you see all of Israel suffered in the desert and didn't see the promised land because they refused to go to war. You see that was why they wandered. It wasn't because they were land nav no-goes that they took a short trek from Africa up to Israel, took 40 years. I'm like, not even close. It's because they refused to go to war. And so the question now remains is, okay, well, what about the New Testament? Because you don't really see the commanding to go to war as much. However, you do see glimpses in the New Testament that still has the high office of soldier as one that's respectable. When the followers of John the Baptist came up to him, who were soldiers, say, hey, what do we need to do this whole salvation thing? He didn't say stop being soldiers. Instead, he said, hey, don't extort more money than you should, and basically be good soldiers and don't be super corrupt. Over and over in the New Testament, there's metaphors talking about, hey, a soldier doesn't serve at his own expense and officers. And so there's good boxing and military type things as well. The centurion, who was a soldier of soldiers and commander, wasn't condemned by Jesus, but on the contrary, was lifted up as one of the heroes of the faith in that day and age. And he was a killer of men. He was a soldier. And then also Romans 13, leader bears the sword. That means judgment, kill, death kind of stuff. And presumably that person could be a servant of the Lord. And so the question is whether you are called to pick up the sword and defend the weak and innocent like God does, or pick up a cross and don't defend and or don't physically go about, but you're called more to be a martyr. As for turn the other cheek, this is how I put it to our young warrior poets out there that ask this question a good bit. If somebody just doesn't like your face and says, Sean, your face is stupid and I don't like it, and I'm going to take this stabbed hand and I'm going to punch you in the face. Perhaps if you were a really strong man, you could turn the other cheek and just let it happen. Forgive me. Say, you know what? Love you, love Jesus. I'm not going to do, you get that one. And that probably just, I'm strong at the time. I punched Sean McDowell, atheists all in your comment section are just cheering. Way to go. That guy's awful. Like, boom, there you go, atheist. You're welcome. But, you probably brain into me. I'd never recover from your forgiveness. Like in 20 years, I'm kind of like, why did he do that? Totally did it. Now, a weaker man may, now let's change it a little bit. That's turning the other cheek to defend yourself. However, what if it was somebody kicked open your door one night and is going to rape and kill your family? Now, you turn the other cheek there. I would say you're an extremely evil person that wouldn't defend the innocent, because it's not about you being slighted and turning the other cheek. It's about be a defender of the innocent. God calls himself that. He calls himself a mighty man of war. He is a defender of the weak, and we are made in the character of God, and that is a good and holy thing to be able to protect the weak and innocent. It's not turn the other cheek time. How's that? That's a lot of talking.
No, that was great, man. I figured you'd give somewhat that defense, but I'll tell you, a lot of Christians debate about this and have since the early church. Appreciate how much you've thought this through, going back to Scripture. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit before we get to. We're going to talk about the Warrior Poet Society. You were a full-time missionary for a while. I think a lot of people might not know this, but you've mentioned a few times being a ranger. Now, maybe I shouldn't ask the question this way and you can just chastise me, but my suspicion is a lot of people don't know what that means. A lot of people know or think they know what it means to be a SEAL because of the whole Bin Laden thing. How does it compare, contrast? What does it mean to be a ranger? What did that training entail? And what did you do in the military?
Sure. So I was a sergeant, fire team and squad leader in 2nd Ranger Battalion. Every branch of the military has their own special operations. So Navy has their SEALs. Marines have their Raiders or Force Recon. Army has their Rangers. And so all these specialized groups from the different branches come together to make the special operations community. That's what I was, special operations. Rangers don't write about their experiences and chase book deals quite as much as my SEALs. You brother SEALs out there. I got a whole bunch of buddies. I did a ton of missions with SEALs and buddies. And so that's just me firing a shot over the bow of my homies.
Saw that coming.
The Navy SEALs. But we just... we do very similar things. We don't play in water quite as much. So okay. Just picture the worst kind of training you can go through. And that's what we did. It was awful. Almost died, just doing the training to get ready to.
Wow.
So, anyway, you do all the things, you experience all the pain so that you can kind of be able to laugh at it and keep going. Ranger on.
Well, good for you. Now, you have this Warrior Poet Society, we're going to get to in a minute, but you were a full-time missionary for a while. Tell me, was that right after you got out of the military? How did you go into mission work, and what did you do? Where did you go as a missionary?
So during my time in the military, I was excited about Jesus. I was growing. I was reading. I was trying to plug into church. And when I got out of the military, ended up going back to college and met my wife, got a degree, and did some other stuff. But my wife and I had both had just a heart for missions. And so we thought how cool it would be to one day be able to go do something a little bit longer than kind of vacation missions, where you go a few days over and you repaint the same church like for the 30th time and then see the sights and get funding from other folks. Probably everyone's going to be freaking out in the comments of like, what? If you're upset by that, it might be true. So Everyone's bailing right now. So anyway, we wanted to, make an impact. We wanted to do some substantial missions. I'd been
Mm,
on a few short-term trips, and some of them were pretty good. Some of them weren't as good, but to be able to really just settle into a culture and do something, well, we wanted to do that. We thought a year would be a great timeline. So we ended up finding an opportunity came across our bow, and we're like, we quit everything. We ended up moving abroad. We rented out our house, and we spent a year there. And at the end of it, we're kind of like, all right, that was good. Ready? High five, honey. Let's go home. And we felt just those doors closed and
mm.
doors to stay were open. And we realized we were not released from that. So we ended up staying a second year, and then a
Oh, wow.
third year, and then a
Wow.
fourth year. It's probably some of the hardest work I've ever done. It was probably the most rewarding work I've ever done. And it's really where I learned how to teach. And so now I teach gunfighting around the country. I make a lot of self-defense, security-minded stuff, also culture war stuff, things on masculinity, God, family, country, that kind of stuff, homeschooling, all kinds of subjects we cover on our Warrior Poet Society YouTube channel and on our streaming service and app, WPSN Network, watch WPSN.com. And so we're teaching all the time. But really, where I learned how to teach was teaching Bible 3 hours a day, every day for years. I would read all day and then teach, and that's all I did for years. At the end of 4 years, we came home, and Warrior Poet Society would come a few years after that.
I saw one of your recent videos, and you were talking about upcoming trips that you're doing, and you made a comment that you have people watching. I think you said there's Buddhists and Hindus and atheists and pagans. You mentioned you're uniquely a Christian, but you have a ton of people watch your stuff who aren't Christians. Do you still see yourself as a missionary to some degree? Or do you just say, here's kind of my job, what I do with Warrior Poet Society, and I do missions on the side? Are you like an undercover missionary now? Like, how do you approach the task that you do in terms of your faith?
So my organization is not me. Warrior Poet Society is not a Christian organization. We're not.
Mm,
We are an ancient brotherhood and ethos. I would define us as people who live for higher purpose and who are ready to sacrifice in the defense of others. That could be
mm,
an atheist or a Buddhist, it can be a Muslim, it can be just about anything as long as you meet our base prereqs of live for higher purpose, ready to sacrifice in the defense of others. Lovers of people, lovers of truth, defenders of both. That's kind of that's the baseline. I'm the founder. I'm just the one that owns the trademark and copyright in the 21st century. I happen to be a Christian and an outspoken one. And so that's me. However, we got a ton of folks in Warrior Poet Society who tune in and attend our training classes to learn how to be able to defend yourself with guns and knives and all that kind of stuff who aren't from my worldview. We just got
mm.
back from a Europe trip. We were gone 12 days, brought 55 people with us to Europe, four
Wow.
different countries, and we talked to a lot of folks, and not everyone there was Christian. It was all kinds of different backgrounds and walks of life. Had wonderful conversations and stuff, and that was good. So no, I'm a Christian. My organization is not, but we've got quite a few Christians.
Your YouTube channel has totally blown up in the sense an amazing amount of followings, a lot of views. I was looking at the comments of some recently, and there's people super engaged in what you're doing. Why do you think that there's such a following and interest in the Warrior Poet Society? What is it about this cultural moment that people are drawn to what you're doing?
It's because most of our culture's trash, man. It's just
Hmm.
lie, propaganda, and just upside down thinking. It's the abandonment of reason. It's postmodernism, which people are getting tired of. It's weird gender theory, grooming of kids. It's just some gross stuff happening. And people are just sick of it. And they miss, men and women alike, miss a strong masculinity regardless of how vehemently it's attacked by folks that hate traditional gender roles or masculinity or femininity. The progressives are progressing in the wrong direction and that they think anything old is bad and it's just a self-defeating, self-destroying ideology that is,
Hmm.
it makes people miserable. People miss strong masculinity and they really don't even have a good idea what that is.
Hmm. Now, when I first heard the title Warrior Poet, I instantly thought of David because interestingly enough, when I speak to audiences, John, I'll say, typically Christian audiences, I'll say, give me an example of somebody in the Bible who's a manly man. Interestingly, I think one time out of the dozen times I've done this, somebody has said Jesus. Somehow we have this feminine view of Jesus, which is a whole interesting conversation itself. But the first two are always David and Samson. Hands down, always the first two. And I'll say, was David, at least the responses that I get, was David manly when he cut off Goliath's head? And they're like, of course. I said, was he manly when he wrote poetry? And was
Equally.
he manly when he played, the harp? The Bible makes no distinction that one, he's acting manly in A, but a little feminine over there. Sometimes he's a person who does both. Is that the heart of what you're getting at? And does the character of David play any role in where the title warrior poet came from?
Absolutely. The man who killed the most people in the Bible also was like the Bible's greatest worshiper. Arguably, the greatest warrior was also the greatest worshiper, and that there's a hint in there. And a man after God's own heart. You get pictures, types. Now people weigh in of like David was awful because he did these things. I'm like, he did more awful stuff than me. He also did a lot more holy stuff than me. I'm going to cut everyone a break and say we're all terrible, evil people, and Jesus is awesome. But Jesus is the top warrior poet. David is a really top warrior poet as well. We have kind of our subscript of like, here you go, warrior poet. And we say lovers and fighters. It's not one of the two. If you choose between lover and fighter, you're not really good at either, because love protects. So we're lovers and we're fighters. We're lions and we're lambs. We're warriors and we're poets. That means I am ready to stack bodies against ISIS, but I'm still vulnerable with my kids. They're not afraid of me, but let terrorists be. And so I'm romantic with my wife. If I stab myself, I don't cry. I go in the bathroom and cry about that where no one can see me. So no, I mean, there's folks that want to remove all the emotion, the love, the passion, the romance from masculinity are people that just don't understand it at all.
I'm curious. You talked earlier about kind of this gender ideology, and I have concerns about gender ideology. I've also read a lot of just what's called queer theory, and frequently people will say they just didn't fit these cultural stereotypes and felt like I can't be a man or I can't be a woman because of these cultural stereotypes that might not be found in scripture or really match up with what it means to be a man. So I have huge compassion there. But then on the flip side, I see this attack on masculinity as if there's no difference between a man and a woman. And I think that's misguided. And in some ways you've answered this, but how do we find a balance that doesn't adopt certain stereotypes on people who might not fit those stereotypes, but genuinely recognize there is masculinity and there's femininity, and these things are good?
Of course, people feel adrift now. We've had a war going on against outright real masculinity and real femininity for decades now. And now we're waking up to the consequences that people feel adrift. Of course they do. They haven't actually seen any masculine role models in movies and TV for decades. They're all dead, or they're all gone. There's no Andy Griffith show anymore. No one's both. But Andy Griffith wasn't the greatest idea there. He wasn't the greatest thing. But the big point is like Tim the Toolman Taylor. People are like, oh, there's masculinity. But no, he's a joke. His wife's always teaching him some moral lesson at the end. His kids make fun of him constantly. He's the butt of every joke. And his big claim of masculinity is he laughs like, and then he plays in the garage with tools. He's kind of just a big kid, and that's kind of what you got. And now you just see open, outright, chauvinistic, kind of mean-spirited, toxic thing, or you see just this effete snowflake, sorry excuse for a man. And so they're not really they don't really even know what it is they're rejecting. Because there's been this postmodern war to destroy everything that was old. It's destroying all of our categories, and it's so millennial of us to say I don't fit in any categories. I'm like, Are you a human being? Well, I don't really like that label. Of course you don't. That's exactly what a postmodern indoctrinized millennial would say. I'm kind of the same way. Now I'm railing like an old curmudgeon, but I'm just seeing the propaganda, the indoctrination just soaked in so much.
Mm.
What it is, it's the toll of a vehement attack by postmodernism over decades. So yeah, folks feel adrift. I think folks, even if they're not able to consciously understand all that, when they see a strong man with a family intact, a wife
Mm.
that's flourishing, kids that are adventurous but also disciplined, someone that's educated, that loves other people, but that's also tough enough to be able to not only handle their own suffering without crying out for a woke space, or a safe space, that they're also able to shoulder the burdens of others. That's attractive. And if we had more of that, I guarantee you there'd be a lot of less folks searching for a place somewhere between masculinity and femininity. They
Mm.
have rejected what they have never seen.
John, I've started asking more questions on Twitter than making statements and in social media because Jesus asked a ton of questions. And a question I asked recently, I said, what's one of the biggest lies that you think is perpetrated in society today? And I said, one of the biggest lies that I think is that real men don't cry.
Hmm.
Do you agree? Or if you disagree, tell me why I'm wrong.
Real men don't cry when they are experiencing physical pain,
Okay?
and then everything else is fair game. Jesus wept. Jesus wept out of his strength, not his weakness, right? And if
Amen.
you're a human and consummate man, of like I definitely I definitely cry. Sometimes movies just crush me, like Les Miserables, the musical, Hugh Jackman. My wife and I saw that 3 weekends in a row, and we ugly cried during all of them. Moved the heart, man. It was the passion and the sacrifice, the hunt for redemption, the love story, the broken dreams of like. I think someone who feels deeply can be moved that way. Now, what I'm nervous of is someone who doesn't feel enough that their emotions
Mm.
overcome. I'm like, that person probably doesn't love very much. And if they
Mm.
don't love very much, how could I possibly say that they're a great man?
Mm.
Like an oak tree doesn't cry either. It's not human.
Mm.
And so, no, I'd reject that. However, I raise my boys of like, if it's heart stuff, you love your mommy a lot, or something like that. I'm like, that's a good thing. We love people, and if that overcomes the emotions, so be it. But there is a certain grid of like, you shouldn't be crying all the time. You stump your toe when you cry. You need to suck it up, man. Seriously, suck it up. Someone slowly sawing off your wrist. Don't you cry, man. Don't you cry.
John, you're killing me, man. As you were saying this, one of the things I thought of, one of the last times I actually cried is when we were in Israel and we were at the church right next to Bethesda. I don't remember the name of the church. I don't know if you remember this. We were standing in the middle of the church and it was beautiful. It's high, Gothic looking. And we just sang worship songs about exalting God. And I just lost it in Israel, worshiping God. And I just sat there and I remember thinking, I didn't expect this, wasn't trying to do it. It's easy to feel embarrassed, but I thought there's something beautiful because you're right. We cry out of our vulnerability. And when we love somebody, we make ourselves vulnerable. So real men are going to love deeply, which opens us up to be hurt deeply. That's how Jesus cried.
Right. But also, there's a flip side of that love where people would focus on the vulnerability. I'm like, no, that love, though it looks vulnerable, crying, that's also your strength, of like
Mm.
that same love and desire to protect family is the thing that sends a dude overseas to be able to fight and die for his country. As
Wow.
G.K. Chesterton says, the soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. And so that love is extremely strong. The deeper it is, the stronger it is. And that motivates a man to be able to push through and sacrifice in life and sacrifice and death.
John, I did my dissertation on studying the apostles and their willingness to suffer and die for the belief that they had seen the risen Jesus. That doesn't tell us that it's true. But that tells me they're not liars and they're not inventing a story to put themselves in harm's way. That makes no sense. What
Right.
would you die for?
I die for my family. I believe I'd die for my faith. And by the way, I want to say of like, what would you die for? What would you live for? I'm writing a book on this. The title is A Good Reason to Die. It's Warrior
Really?
Poet Life and Death.
Wow.
So that'll be forthcoming in 2023. So anyway, it's something that given a good bit of thought, or I don't want to give too much away, but I know enough about fear and facing death to know you'll never really know what you do until you're in that circumstance. You're watching a Jason Bourne movie and you're like, oh, I would just jump out the window, gainer, and shoot him on my way down. That's what I would do. I'm like the whatever, I'm a professional firearms trainer. I hear so many things about what guys would do in a fight, and then I'll test it. I'm like, all right, you got a knife, you got a gun, all right, both conceal, ready, and fight, and then you just put it together and see what happens. I'm like, yeah, guys are over. Folks, there was some study. It's anecdotal, but it was like guys uh, revealed that they overestimated how well they do in a fight by 5,000%. It had the ring of truth. I didn't verify, but I'm like, yeah, that's
Wow.
true. You never know what you would really do until you're in that
Mm.
circumstance. Now, I've been in the happy position of I faced my death many times. So I would die for my country. I would die for fellow soldiers next to me. I would die for my family. I would die for my faith. Those are the big ones. Um, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we're gonna have to wait for the book to come out. That sounds amazing. I'm super intrigued by that. Now this is a little bit of shifting gears, and my channel is distinctly not political. I don't weigh into critiquing political candidates, but I'm always interested in what candidates believe and how they come to their conclusions in terms of their philosophy about human nature and marriage and ethical issues. So I'm just curious, how does your faith shape the way you approach politics, and how much do you talk about it publicly and or not? How does that shape you, John?
For years, we didn't talk politics on Warrior Poet Society because we're really philosophical, we're theological, we're pragmatic, we're not political. And part of that's because I just hate politics. As a general rule, I think politicians are a bunch of liars and crooks.
Mm.
There are lots of platitudes, and once you get in office, then they just don't do anything. And when that briefcase of money shows up, I think most of
Mm.
them are bought already by a powerful elite that's pulling strings. And before I would have apologized because that sounded pretty conspiratorial. Now I bet, folks in your channel will be highly united by that idea because it's just the evidence is undeniable now and then of like, what's the difference between conspiracy theory and truth? Like, well, about 6 months now. It's about 6 months. That's the difference. I have become more political over the last year and a half because I've been
Mm.
forced to be. And so I'm a little bit bitter when I do talk about politics because I feel like my arm has been twisted so much because everything has become a political issue. Politics, if you will, has gobbled up everything.
That's true.
If like you want to talk about men and women, of like, oh, that's a political kind of thing, and then abortion somehow is a political issue. How is that political? It's biological or it's theological. It's biological at least. Like, is it a life? Yes or no? It's like it's how is this a political question? You're like, well, what in the world are we going to talk about? Can't talk about guns or speech or if like it's taken up every area of life. You can't even talk about the weather because oops, global warming, climate change. You can't talk about anything without bumping in to some political triggering. And I'm supposed to do this fancy footwork dance that the political correctness advocates would have me do, which is really, as far as I can tell, just a muzzle to keep people from saying what they really think and feel. And so, yeah, I'm just immediately irritated and exhausted by the entire political
Mm.
divide. It just looks to me like it's just a rebranded Marxism, which is designed to put the haves against the have-nots. That's not working as much. So instead, it's more like class warfare. And so the elites put us fighting against each other so they can seize more power and control. And that's the game. It's been that way for a long time. The tragedy is that we're so stupid we don't realize that's going on. Instead, we're screaming over each other, not realizing that our real enemy, Big Brother, and our institutions of power are just playing us like fools, seizing massive amounts of power. And so that's the terrain that I see. I know all mankind is fallen and God is good. So I'm looking forward to a benevolent monarchy in my next life.
Are you optimistic on the future of America? Are you concerned? Has that ship already sailed? If you had to state, and I've seen in a lot of your videos, you'll have a flag in the background, so obviously patriotic. What is your sense of where America is at and where it's going?
I'm not a generally optimistic guy in life.
Hmm.
I suppose I'm not pessimistic either. As the consummate analyst, I'll be a realist. So sometimes things look real
Okay.
good, and sometimes things look real bad. I'll say this: I love my country,
Hmm.
despite all of her flaws, which are many. And if somebody wanted to jump in the comments below and just bash America because of all these evils and whatever, I'd probably agree with a lot of it. But I've
Hmm.
traveled a lot. I've been around the globe quite a bit. I've seen the worst combat zones and living in third world countries. I've lived abroad for years. I will say, even in this last trip, I just got back from Europe yesterday. I spent 12 days in 4 different countries. And around day 7 or 8, I looked at my wife and I said, "This is beautiful. Love the history, all this. I'm swept up in it, but there's no place I'd rather live than America."
Hmm.
Because I still do just think it's the greatest country on earth to live. As someone who's stepped outside it enough, I think it is at least a valid subjective, thing that I can say. I'm not optimistic because I see that our institutions of power have all been hijacked by a radical leftist ideology. They're anti-America, anti-guns, anti-free speech. They're anti. Traditional family, they're anti-masculinity, they're anti-women now. The trans movements come out. They seem to be anti-everything. And so that's really scary because postmodernism, it's not a philosophy because it's not trying to pull everything toward a unifying truth. It's an anti-philosophy.
Hmm.
It's deconstructionism. It's destroying of all truth. It's the destruction of all categories. And it's hard to build something great like America. That was hard work. A lot of people died to build to build our country in the late 18th century. Then the tree of liberty had to be refreshed many times over the last couple hundred years by the blood of patriots and tyrants and world wars. We were just doing a World War II tour where we're seeing just the price that it costs to safeguard it. Now the check is due again as we see a radical institutions of power. You look at academia. It's just
Hmm.
overrun by this anti-everythingism, like the anti-logic, anti-everything. Hollywood, the media, the Congress, the executive branch. Everywhere I look, our institutions of power have turned against us. Now, even in the woke corporate sector. And I'm like, yeah, if everyone's rooting for the destruction of evil America, we'll probably get our wish. And so that looks really bad. And you can even look at our metrics right now. It's spooky. Folks that have never really been into guns are buying guns now. Massive amounts of people are buying
Hmm.
guns, ammunition. They're stockpiling food for upcoming food shortages. Folks that didn't have a conspiratorial bone in their body are now calling me, messaging me of like, "Hey, what should I do about getting chickens and growing my own food?" People are
Really?
scared because everyone reads the writing on the wall. So yeah, it doesn't look good. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, it doesn't look good.
You don't strike me as someone who's just going to fold up and quit fighting, but is going to fight until the end. But that's a fair analysis. I appreciate that you look at America and are like, hey, we've had flaws and mistakes, but there's something great about what America is meant to stand for, even if we failed to live it out in many, many ways. Go ahead.
The hour is late, but America
Hmm.
is still worth fighting for.
Hmm. Well said. That's a great summary. John, I imagine you've gotten this question before, but I know a ton of people follow you, as you said earlier, and the larger Warrior Poet Society that are not Christians. If somebody's like, John, why should I be a Christian? What would you say?
Well, first off, I'd want to do a little bit of a read on exactly where that was coming from.
Okay.
Is this kind of like, are they inviting me to a sparring match? Are they an honest, seeker? Like, what are they moving from? What are their questions? So I'm probably going to ask like a series of like 6 or 7 questions so that I can be a
Smart.
little bit more accurate with I want to shoot a sniper round, not a shotgun at the horizon. And so I'm going to ask a bunch of questions to figure out what in the world's going on. But a little bit of my elevator defense. All right. So if they have already admitted that there is a God, there's creation, so there's a creator, design, so designer, moral law, then there must be a moral lawgiver. So as long as we're at least deists, I would borrow from Francis Schaeffer. It's kind of like my master. Love that guy, Lewis, and then
Mm,
Schaeffer. Awesome. So I'd borrow a little bit from him. I'd be like, well, there's something uh, special about looking into Christianity Bible. Just every religion in the world says do this to get right with God, and it's only Christianity that stands apart, maybe not even technically as a religion, that says there's nothing you can do right with God, but God made a way. Of like that right there, needs a moment. Then I would probably ask them like, hey, listen, how many world religions can you name? And then they'll name this list, and it'll be like Islam and Christianity, or maybe they'll separate Catholicism, probably not Catholicism. And uh, some will say Jehovah's Witness, and people say Mormonism in there, and then they'll say Hinduism, and then on they go. And they'll be like, you know what all these have in common is that Jesus and the Bible are held paramount in those. Islam,
mm,
Jesus, their second highest prophet in the Old Testament, is considered holy scriptures with them. In Hinduism, Jesus is considered a god. In Buddhism, he's considered an enlightened Buddha. In Christianity, Judaism, and Mormonism, he's considered, at least God. Yeah, I think God, Mormonism makes him anyway, without getting into, there's something special of all the world religions that is pointing toward Jesus and God, and you even, or Jesus in Bible. And so then you add on of like, well, he kind of split time in two. It's the year 2022. Because something remarkable happened at that time, and they're at Christmas and Easter, and then the catacombs, and largest religion ever. So you start stacking it up, and it's a world religion too. So it's like, well, if you were born in a different country, of like, no, wherever you mention Christianity has been there,
mm.
a long, long before. And so it takes on. There's enough clues that beg leaning into this one.
Hmm. That's awesome. You speak on some pretty controversial issues, John, whether it's gun control, you mentioned gender ideology, America, and that intersects with politics. I heard you talking about recently, you were doing an interview, and you're like, I can't touch a gun itself on air or I will get blocked. I'm curious how you handle some of those dynamics of silencing speech that you want to say but being wise on a certain platform. Like this past week I did a video on TikTok, and I basically said, we know when life begins. The mom's alive, the dad's alive, the sperm's alive, the egg is alive, the embryo's alive. There's no debate that this is a living thing. And it got blocked for hate speech. I was like,
Yeah.
when is biology hate? Now it's probably some metric, and maybe now with the SCOTUS ruling, more and more people are sensitive to it. I don't know, but that blocking was like, really? I see so much more genuinely hateful stuff on all sides of this debate than arguing that the unborn is alive. Like, this is ridiculous. But I'm also on Instagram, also have this channel on YouTube, and I try to think through how do I just be wise so I don't get blocked, but I
No.
also don't want to be silenced and say what I think is true. I'm not going to give in to, certain pressure to not speak. How do you navigate that either on YouTube and some of the other social media platforms like Instagram that you use?
With grit teeth and a chip on my shoulder.
Okay.
Man, our big tech, Lord, they hate us. They hate
Really?
everything we stand for. They despise us, but they're different than you and I in that their morality is literally their morality thinks that we're super evil. And guess what? I think a lot of what you guys do is super evil as well. But they're in charge of the largest search engines in the world and all the social media platforms that we're on. And they'll say, I don't think you should have a right to speak. And so they just take it away from you. And then they'll have some trumped up, real vague written community standards. That's a moving target that's always, changing, and no one can really pin it down. And that's where bureaucrats are hiding behind intentionally vague bureaucracy. But what it is, what's really behind it all is authoritarianism. It's a moral revolution. It's not really even a political question anymore. It used to be Republicans disagreed with Democrats in that we all wanted good for America, but we had a different way on how to get it. Now it's different than that. Now it's we both think the other side is inherently evil. That's what's going on. And that's the root of all this stuff. We're having political conversations. I'm like, this isn't politics at all. When you look at it, it's we both think the other one is Hitler, and so there you go. I don't actually call people Hitler. I think I just call Hitler. He was the actual only Hitler. But they think we're evil because we're against women's rights. And I think they're evil because they've killed more babies than make enough. It's a body count that would make Mao Zedong marvel. I'm like, holy smokes, this is a genocide against the unborn. It's like, what about women's rights? I'm like, what about not murdering humans? How about that? And so, yeah, it's right there of like, you get to a point where we're talking past each other. It's not politics. It's a moral problem right there. And big tech, like they don't think it's wrong to be able to completely silence. They don't hold our values. And we're baffled when they play by a different, standard, because I wouldn't silence them. I wouldn't.
As I think about some stuff I've had on my channel, I think it's a few times when I've talked about gender issues. I've talked about abortion. Maybe one time, I'd have to go check, I did an interview on kind of gun control and how Christians approach and think about that. Never been blocked, but demonetized.
Yeah.
What are some of the limitations that are put on you on YouTube, but also on like Instagram?
Yeah, it's savage because, like we're running a company here behind me. I've got staff and they're working away on desk clumps and computers, and we're got plenty of employees around here, and we study our analytics. We know them very well. Here, just as a quick way that I can have kind of everyone lean in and see what's going on. When it was announced Elon Musk was going to buy Twitter, I've got more Twitter followers in 2 days than I'd gotten in 2 years prior without doing any posts. How's that happen? I'm like, well, what happens is big tech overlords have put these restrictor plates on all of our social media accounts. Happens on YouTube as well. When we were around 100,000 followers, we'd get about 500 followers a day, right? When we were about 100,000 followers. Now we're 1.2, 1.3 million, somewhere in there. And we get about 300 a day, 400 a day.
And it does. Serious?
Yeah, we before, so September 17th of 2000 or September of 2017, there was a huge change in the algorithm so that if you weren't already a big gun channel, you weren't going to be able to get big. And then they've had different updates, and we can see it. If like we have a video that really does well, I'm like, oh, brace for yourselves, guys. And then they'll punish us in the analytics over the next couple of weeks to make it up. So it's like a restrictor plate. So they are managing how much growth you get. Then they'll go through and just unsubscribe people in droves, and they'll never notify anyone but our super users. They knock down our demonetization. We have no real way of knowing how many actual views we really get because they just tell you your views. You have no way of finding out whether that's true. Then they decide how much money they would pay you for that on the dollar. And so it's all arbitrary. You have no idea what you're getting. Josh, you may be getting 10 times the amount of views on your video. You would have no way of knowing. No way of knowing. And so, they're not playing fair. Instagram and Facebook are really hitting us hard now that less than 1% of our audience even sees our posts anymore.
Oh my
of like we had
goodness.
a certain amount that we would do. And now our content on YouTube and on social media, it's better than ever. We have teams of people that strategize where we've got, here, this is a red camera over my shoulder somewhere. It's off screen. Anyway, we got all kinds of cool hardware and tech, and we're doing better than ever. Yet our analytics continually go down. What they do is they, like a virus, us, me and you, they'll see, ooh, we hate everything that guy stands for. Quarantine. And so what that means is they don't let you grow much anymore. And then it's just a slow choke. Every month or so, they'll let your reach go a little bit less and a little bit less. They still let you a little bit of wins in there so that you kind of trend downward over time. But this is the game they're playing, as it's a slow way to choke us all to death until the only voice that's left is the left.
So are you moving to different platforms, building your own? What are you doing intentionally that if that happens, the company and influence doesn't sink?
So we obsess about getting mailing lists, email lists of guys. Go to our website, Warrior Poet Society, and give us your email list, because eventually it'll be the only way that we can actually have any communication with you. So there's that. And then we also have our own app and streaming service. It's WPSN. So you can download our app for Android or iOS or Roku or Apple TV. And we have our own entertaining shows like our War Poet show. All of our YouTube content's backed up because eventually we're going to get booted off YouTube. So we went ahead and backed it up. And then we've got all of our training classes as well. So people who want to learn gun fighting, knife fighting, long range shooting, knife throwing, all kinds of really, really cool stuff is there. So anyway, we got our own app and streaming service and backup websites. So that's what we're doing, planning on that. But they will eventually strangle us all out.
Wow. That is tough. Well, give me one example. I'm curious of just a post or video that you're like most proud of. You're like, this was an awesome video, got views, influenced people. Maybe it's on YouTube, maybe somewhere else. Tell me about one over the years you've been doing this that was just like that was awesome.
Oh, you mean like that did well of like
Yeah, like numbers, but it doesn't just have to be numbers. Sometimes
sure.
I do ones that I love that have less views, but were just like really significant. Tell us one that you loved that might entice my audience, if they haven't yet, to go subscribe to your stuff.
So the one that springs to mind first is not the greatest or anything, but I had a congressman on the channel, and he said
Mm.
something kind of racy that caught everyone on the left's attention. And so Warrior Poet Society was mentioned on Stephen Colbert's show,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was basically, Stephen Colbert was making a joke, making fun of the Warrior Poet Society as being a silly name because it was hard to write poetry with an AR-15. And so it wasn't a really good joke, but it was cool to be on Stephen Colbert because, oh, he's Stephen Colbert, whatever. But anyway, we immediately jumped on that. I'm like, oh, I see an opportunity there. And so basically, we played that clip at the front of a YouTube video and says, all right, Stephen Colbert, poetry with an AR-15, challenge accepted. And so we all dressed up in Shakespearean garb. Hold on just a second. Let me see. We had it even printed out here. So this is me right here. This is actually me. And somebody
Wow.
did a painting of it here. But basically, I wrote poetry with an AR-15. It was awesome. I
That
chose
is
something from Julius Caesar, the quote on "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs aboard." So it was a great time to kind of punk him out, and everyone knew we were funnier than Colbert there. So check it out on YouTube. Warrior Poet Society answers Stephen Colbert. Warrior Poet Stephen Colbert. So poetry with an AR, really fun, won't disappoint. But we're putting all kinds of fun content out of like
mm,
it's good stuff. But if you don't search for us, you're not going to find us because
wow.
YouTube hates us.
Wow. Well, I show your stuff to my wife sometimes. I'm like, look at what John did this time. She remembers you clearly from our run in the Sea Galley, being in Israel. And I appreciate you're talking about really serious stuff, but you clearly don't take yourself and your team too seriously, and you're having fun while you do it. I think that's a great model, which is awesome. Tell me quickly, your kids. How old are your kids?
8 and 9.
8 and 9. Okay. So, what's the secret to being a warrior poet dad?
Yeah, great question. Um, So I just took them to Europe with me on a World War II tour. And so we're going through like airborne museums, and we're at Pointe du Hoc. There's these big craters on the Normandy countryside. My boys are playing in the craters, and then they'll come up and
Mm,
learn how to take out a bunker with a hand grenade. I taught them how to actually defeat a bunker. So when we're going up the Pointe du Hoc cliffs where that D-Day invasion was, I'm teaching them small unit tactics. It's pretty fun. And so, anyway, I'm teaching them that. We homeschool, of course, because we don't want the state to indoctrinate our kids to hate our values one day and
wow.
undo all hope of education. So we homeschool. We are filled with great teachable moments on how to love God, how to love each other, how to be self reliant, how to be focused, how to protect other folks. But right now at 8 and 9, we want them to just cut new trails and be creative and fall in love with reading and get the right books in front of you. There was this wonderful scene in the movie Braveheart
Mm,
when William Wallace's dad, and I realize it's historical fiction, but I'm just going to go with the movie right now. So
do
the
it.
well actually trolls, leave me alone. I call them well actually trolls because they always love to be like, well, actually, and then they do this and they go all caps and they pretend that they're the only ones with logic and no one else understands it because they learn like 5 logical fallacies and no logic. Anyway, they drive me nuts. Hey, well, actually, trolls, you don't know logic. You just memorized 5 logical fallacies and you're annoying everyone. So, anyway, William Wallace's dad had just died, and his uncle Argyle came up to him, and young Wallace is holding Argyle's sword.
Mm,
And he's looking at it and he's just awestruck. And Argyle is watching this. And then he takes it out of the boy's hands. He says, first, learn how to use this, and then I'll teach you how to use this. And we're kind
mm.
of there. I'm teaching them how to think and love and learn and grow. And so I'm doing a little guns and wrestling along the way. But anyway, let's just be like Jesus. I think that would be a good way.
Amen to that. I have a son who's 9, about the age of one of your kids, daughter who's 15, and a son who's 18, just turned 18. Obviously, this is last year in school, last summer at home. And yesterday I came home and I had like a chapter to write. And he goes, Dad, let's work out. I was like, okay, chapter can wait. Gonna spend time with my son.
Mhm.
That's the kind of stuff you'll never regret, ever. And I know you do that by example as well that you just talked about. But that's awesome. John, I have a million more questions for you. When your book comes out, let's talk about it. Let's promote it. That really intersects with my work on the apostles and their
Mhm.
willingness to suffer and die. So I can't wait to see it. You've talked about the Warrior Poet Society, but anything else that I missed, you want my audience to know? I think they should follow you, even if they disagree politically. Number one, they're going to enjoy it. Number two, it's just quality content. And number three, you have convictions and you model it in a way. Everything I've seen is charitable to people you disagree with, even though you state your convictions firmly. So I hope people will follow and engage you. But anything I missed, you want the audience to know just about you, about the Warrior Poet Society.
No, just to that point, people feel like you can't follow someone or listen to them unless you 100% agree. And I think
Hmm.
that's just really bad. I don't know if I agree with me 100%, you know? And I've got to follow me. I can't get away from me, frankly, because of ontology. No, just anyway, yeah. So we're made better in the exchange and the wrestling of antithetical ideas. That's a good thing, and we're all on journeys, and so am I. So we welcome folks that don't agree completely with me because I'm going to be a different man in 10 years. I hope to
Hmm.
be a little bit more like Jesus. It just turns out it's a lot harder than I ever dreamed it would be. I thought I'd be better than this by now.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's it. Sean, you got to come on my channel as well. Love to have you.
Hmm.
So plan on that as well.
Well, I'd be honored. That would be a treat. Anytime, anyway, big and small that I can help, let me know. Thanks so much for coming on again, John Lovell from the Warrior Poet Society. It's been a treat. Thanks, my friend.
See you, brother.